I was deadheading my roses when I saw her shadow fall across the garden gate. 3 years of silence. And there she was, Lila, my granddaughter, looking nothing like the polished influencer who'd once called me just old before walking out of my life forever. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her famous blonde hair unwashed and pulled back carelessly. The confidence that once radiated from her social media posts had vanished, replaced by something I recognized from my own mirror. During the hardest times, defeat. She stood there for a long moment, neither of us moving. The roses I'd been tending suddenly felt heavy in my arthritic hands. But what could she possibly want from someone she'd dismissed as irrelevant? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should probably start at the beginning, or at least where this particular story really begins. My name is Eleanor Bainbridge, Ellie to most people who matter, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a small coastal town in Maine called Seabrook Harbor, in a house I designed myself back when I still believed I could build something lasting. The house sits on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, weathered cedar shingles and large windows that capture both the morning light and the evening storms that roll in from the northeast. I retired early from architecture after a stroke at 65, knocked me sideways for a while. Nothing dramatic, just a gentle reminder from my body that perhaps it was time to slow down. My late husband David used to joke that I approached life like a construction project. Measure twice, cut once, and always have a backup plan. He wasn't wrong. Even now, 7 years after his heart attack took him away, while he was pruning our apple trees, I still wake up each morning with a mental blueprint for the day. The house reflects that orderly nature of mine. Clean lines, everything in its place, but warm too. David insisted on that warmth. "A house isn't a monument, Ellie," he'd say whenever I got too focused on the technical aspects. "It's a home." So we compromised, my structural integrity with his comfort. Built-in bookshelves filled with well-worn novels and architectural journals. A kitchen island perfect for both cooking and drafting plans. Fireplaces in both the living room and my study that we actually used during Maine's long winters. My daily routine has become as carefully structured as any building I ever designed. Morning coffee on the deck if weather permits, tending to my garden, vegetables and flowers both, because a garden needs both sustenance and beauty. Then usually some reading or correspondence. Afternoons might bring a walk down to the harbor to chat with the fishermen coming in, or a visit with Ruby Diaz, my closest friend and neighbor. Evenings are for cooking something simple, maybe a glass of wine while watching the sunset, paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. It's a good life, I tell people when they ask. Peaceful. After 40 years of deadlines and client meetings and the constant pressure to innovate in a field dominated by men who often treated me like an interesting anomaly rather than a professional, I've earned this peace. But peaceful doesn't mean empty, despite what some people might think. Ruby lives in the cottage next door, a rambling Victorian she inherited from her father, and has spent the last 15 years gradually restoring. She's 78, originally from Puerto Rico, came to Maine as a young nurse and stayed to care for her aging father. Now she tends to everyone else in town, whether they ask for it or not. Ruby has opinions about everything and the energy to share them. She also makes the best café con leche outside of San Juan, and isn't shy about using it as a bribe to get me to listen to whatever's on her mind. "You're too isolated up there in your perfect house," she tells me at least once a week. "People need people, Ellie. Even stubborn architects who think they can design their way out of loneliness." She's not entirely wrong, but she's not entirely right either. I have people. There's Ruby herself, of course. There's Alan Westbrook, who's been, well, what would you call it? A companion. We worked together decades ago when I was designing a community center and he was handling the urban planning aspects. We reconnected after my stroke when he sent a condolence card. 3 years late. But he'd only just heard about David's death. Now he drives up from Portland every few weeks. And we talk about books and politics and the changes we've seen in Maine over the years. Sometimes he stays for dinner. Sometimes he stays longer than dinner. At our age, romance moves at a different pace, but it's no less meaningful for that. What I don't have, what I've learned to live without, is family. My daughter Claire lives in London now, has for the past 8 years. She's a financial consultant for some international firm, married to a British man I've met exactly twice. She calls on holidays and birthdays, sends professionally arranged flowers for Mother's Day. But there's a careful distance in our relationship that goes back further than I sometimes want to acknowledge. Claire has always blamed me for her father's death, though she's never said it directly. David had his first heart attack at 58, while I was in the middle of the biggest project of my career, a municipal building complex that would have established my reputation nationally. I was working 70-hour weeks, traveling constantly, leaving David to handle more of the household responsibilities than either of us had planned. He recovered from that first heart attack, but something changed between us. A wariness in his eyes when I talked about new projects. A way he had of touching his chest absently when he thought I wasn't looking. I finished the project. It won awards, and 3 years later, while I was in Chicago consulting on another building, David had the heart attack that killed him. Claire, who was 26 and had just started her own career, arrived at the hospital to find her mother 300 miles away, racing to catch a flight home to a goodbye I would never get to say. "You chose your buildings over your family," she said during one of our rare fights after the funeral. "And now you want sympathy because you're alone." I tried to explain that it wasn't that simple, that David had encouraged my career, that we'd both believed we had time to balance everything out later. But Claire had made up her mind. When she moved to London, it felt less like an adventure and more like an escape. And then there was Lila. Lila arrived when Claire was 32, after what Claire called an unfortunate miscalculation, with a man she described only as charming but unreliable. She never married him, never even told me his full name, but she asked if I would help with the baby. If I could be the kind of grandmother I hadn't quite managed to be a mother. I tried. God, how I tried. When Lila was small, she would spend summers with me in Seabrook Harbor. I taught her to identify. Different types of seabirds, showed her how to start seedlings in small pots, let her help me bake David's favorite oatmeal cookies. She was bright and curious and affectionate, full of questions about everything from why waves always came to shore to how I knew where to put windows when I designed buildings. Because you have to think about where the light wants to go, sweetheart. I remember telling her when she was maybe 7, both of us sitting on the deck drawing pictures of imaginary houses. Light always wants to move and change throughout the day. A good architect learns to work with that instead of fighting it. She nodded solemnly and went back to her drawing. A purple house with yellow polka dots and at least 12 chimneys. When I grow up, I'm going to design houses that are so beautiful, people will cry happy tears when they see them. I kept that drawing. It's still in my desk drawer, though I haven't looked at it in 3 years. As Lila grew older, the summers became shorter and less frequent. Claire would bring her for a week or 2, but there were camps and friends and activities that seemed more important than visiting her grandmother in Maine. I understood. I remembered being young and eager for experiences beyond small-town life, but I missed her. By the time Lila reached her teenage years, I hardly recognized the child who used to help me in the garden. She was all angles and attitude, constantly attached to her phone, documenting everything with an endless series of selfies. She'd become fascinated with social media influencers, young women who seemed to make money simply by being beautiful and posting pictures of their lives online. "This is the future, Grandma Ellie," she informed me during what turned out to be her last visit when she was 19. "Traditional careers are dead. Everything's digital now. You wouldn't understand." I tried to engage with her world, asking questions about her interests, her plans, but everything I said seemed to irritate her. My questions were too old-fashioned. My concerns about stability and long-term planning were evidence that I didn't get it. My attempts to share stories from my own career were met with polite but obvious boredom. The breaking point came during a conversation about her future. Claire had been pressuring Lila to finish college, to have something to fall back on. But Lila was determined to move to Los Angeles and become a full-time influencer. She'd already built a following of several thousand people who seemed interested in her fashion choices and lifestyle tips. "I just need someone to invest in my brand," she explained, scrolling through her phone while she talked. "Like, help me get better equipment, maybe hire someone to handle the business side. I know I can make this work. What exactly would you be selling?" I asked, genuinely curious. She looked at me like I'd asked her to explain quantum physics to a golden retriever. "I'd be selling myself, Grandma. My aesthetic, my lifestyle. Companies pay influencers to feature their products because we have direct access to consumers who trust our recommendations. But what happens when you get older? When there are younger women with newer aesthetics?" That was apparently the wrong question. God, Grandma, you just don't get it at all, do you? Her voice turned sharp, frustrated. "This isn't like your generation where you had to follow some predetermined path and hope for the best. I can create my own opportunities. I can build something that's entirely mine." "I understand wanting independence," I said carefully. "But it sounds like you'd be dependent on the whims of strangers on the internet. What if the platform changes? Its algorithms. What if people simply get bored and move on to someone else?" "That's not going to happen." She was getting angry now, that particular kind of anger young people get when they think older people are being deliberately obtuse. "You just can't accept that the world has changed, that maybe your way of doing things isn't the only way, or even the best way. Lila, I'm not trying to dismiss your dreams. I'm just suggesting that maybe you could pursue this alongside something more stable." "Stable?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean like your marriage? Like your relationship with Mom? You've spent your whole life building things that don't last, Grandma. At least I'm honest about what I'm doing." The words hit harder than I expected. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "That's not fair, Lila. And it's not accurate, isn't it?" She was standing now, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. "Mom barely talks to you. You live alone in this house that's like a museum to your old career. You have no idea what's happening in the real world because you're stuck in the past, judging everyone who's trying to do something different." "I'm not judging you. I'm concerned about you." "No, you're not. You're scared that I might actually succeed at something you don't understand. You want me to fail so you can feel superior about your traditional choices." I stood up too, my own anger finally rising to meet hers. "That's not true, and you know it. I want you to succeed. I want you to be happy. But I also want you to be realistic about the challenges you might face. Realistic? She grabbed her phone and started scrolling aggressively. You want to see realistic? This girl is 22 and just bought a house in Malibu from her YouTube channel. This one has a clothing line and a makeup line and just signed a deal with Netflix. These women are building empires while you sit here in your perfect little house, playing with your perfect little garden, pretending that your way of life has any relevance anymore. Lila, you know what, Grandma? I'm done. I'm done pretending to be interested in your stories about the old days. I'm done listening to you act like you know better than everyone else, just because you're old. You're not wise. You're just old. And irrelevant. And I don't need your approval or your advice or your money to make my dreams come true. She packed her things and left that afternoon. Claire called later to apologize for Lila's behavior. But the apology felt automatic, like something she thought she should do rather than something she meant. She's young, Claire said. She'll come around eventually. But she didn't come around. For the first year, I still saw her posts occasionally, when Ruby would show me things on her tablet. Look, your granddaughter is in Los Angeles now, Ruby would say, pulling up pictures of Lila at parties or in expensive-looking restaurants. She looks happy. She did look happy, I had to admit. Confident and glamorous in a way I'd never been at her age. She'd changed her hair to a platinum blonde that looked striking against her tanned skin. Her clothes were perfectly coordinated. Her makeup, flawless. The captions on her posts were full of positivity and motivation, encouraging her followers to live their best lives and create their own success stories. After the second year, I stopped asking Ruby to show me the posts. It hurt too much to see Lila thriving in a world that seemed to have no room for people like me. And I was finally beginning to accept that maybe this was simply how modern families worked. Children moved on, created their own lives, and parents and grandparents became footnotes in their personal histories. I threw myself into my garden, and my reading strengthened my friendship with Ruby, allowed my relationship with Alan to deepen into something more meaningful than I'd expected to find at this stage of life. I learned to be content with the rhythm of my days, the satisfaction of small accomplishments, the beauty of unexpected moments like watching a great blue heron fishing in the harbor at sunset. I told myself I was happy, and most of the time I believed it. But sometimes, usually late at night when the house felt too quiet, I would think about that drawing of the purple house with polka dots, and I would wonder what had happened to the little girl who wanted to design houses that would make people cry happy tears. I wondered if she was still somewhere inside the young woman who'd called me irrelevant, and I wondered if I'd failed her in some fundamental way that I still didn't understand. I suppose that's why, when I looked up from my roses that morning, 3 weeks ago, and saw her standing at my gate, my first emotion wasn't anger or satisfaction, or even surprise. It was relief, because for 3 years I'd been carrying the weight of that unfinished conversation, that relationship left incomplete. And whatever had brought her back to my door, at least now there was a chance to find out if there was anything left to salvage between us. The broken picture frame lay on my kitchen counter like evidence of a crime. Lila had dropped it when I'd finally let her inside, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold on to the simple wooden frame that had held our last family photo together. The glass had shattered into several pieces, creating a spiderweb of cracks across the image of 3 generations of Bainbridge women. Me, Claire, and Lila, taken during what I now realized had been happier times than I'd appreciated at the moment. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered, staring down at the broken frame. "I'm sorry about everything." I swept up the glass while she sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She looked smaller than I, remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. The confidence that had once seemed so natural to her had been replaced by a brittle fragility that made me want to handle her as carefully as I'd handled the broken glass. "Tell me what happened," I said, settling into the chair across from her. She was quiet for so long, I wondered if she'd heard me. Outside, the morning fog was lifting off the water, revealing the harbor in stages like a photograph developing. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and older than her 25 years. "You were right," she said, "about everything. About building something that lasts. About having a backup plan. About not depending on strangers on the internet." She laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "Turns out the internet strangers are exactly as reliable as you'd expect them to be." I waited. One thing I'd learned in my years of dealing with difficult clients was that people needed space to tell their stories in their own time, their own way. "For a while it was working," she continued. "Better than working, actually. I had almost 2 million followers, brand partnerships with major companies, my own apartment in West Hollywood. I felt like I was proving something, you know? Like I was showing everyone, showing you, that I could succeed on my own terms." She pulled out her phone, an expensive model that looked new, but somehow gave the impression of being handled too much, and scrolled through what I assumed were her old posts. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward me. "This was from last Christmas. Sponsored post for a jewelry company. They paid me $15,000 to wear their earrings in a few photos." The image showed Lila in what looked like a professionally decorated apartment, wearing a red dress and sparkling earrings, holding a champagne glass and smiling directly at the camera. She looked polished and successful and completely at home in her glamorous life. $15,000? I repeated. "For wearing earrings?" "For my influence," she corrected. "For my ability to make my followers want what I had. And it worked. The earrings sold out within 24 hours of my post going live." I studied the image more carefully. Something about it felt hollow to me, though I couldn't quite identify what. "Were you happy?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Happy?" "I was successful. I was independent. I was proving that I could make my own way in the world without following anyone else's rules." "That's not what I asked." She pulled the phone back, staring at the image of herself. "I thought I was happy. I was busy all the time, always working on the next post, the next collaboration, the next opportunity to grow my brand. There wasn't really time to think about whether I was happy." "What changed?" Lila set down the phone and wrapped her hands around the tea mug again. "There was this retreat in Tulum, a luxury wellness resort that wanted me to create content around their new mindfulness program. They flew me down, put me up in this beautiful suite, gave me access to everything. Yoga classes, spa treatments, gourmet meals. All I had to do was document my experience and share it with my followers." She paused, staring out the window toward the harbor. "The other influencers there were intense. Everything was about content. Every meal, every sunset, every moment of supposed relaxation had to be photographed and staged and optimized for maximum engagement. We weren't experiencing anything. We were just documenting the appearance of experiences. I thought about the drawing in my desk drawer, about a little girl who had once been genuinely excited about creating something beautiful." "That sounds exhausting." It was. But the worst part was this woman, Miranda. She was older, maybe 35, and she'd been doing this longer than any of us. She was successful. I mean, really successful. Millions of followers, Her own product lines, book deals, the whole thing. But she was miserable. You could see it in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Lila took a sip of her cold tea and made a face. One night we were sitting by the pool after everyone else had gone to bed, and she told me that she hadn't had a genuine conversation with another person in 2 years. Everything she said and did was calculated for potential content. She said she felt like she was disappearing inside her own brand, becoming nothing but a product to be consumed. What did you tell her? Nothing useful. I was still convinced that I was different, that I was smarter, that I could maintain some kind of authentic core while building my career. But her words stuck with me, and when I got back to LA, I started noticing things I'd been ignoring. She stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden where I'd been working when she arrived. I realized I didn't have any real friends anymore. Everyone in my life was either a professional contact or someone who wanted something from me. Access to my followers, introductions to brands, opportunities to collaborate. I hadn't had a conversation about anything deeper than fashion or travel or products in months. That must have been lonely. It was. But I thought it was temporary. You know, I thought once I reached the next level of success, I'd be able to relax, maybe step back a little and focus on building real relationships. There was always another milestone to reach first. I joined her at the window. My garden was looking good this time of year. The summer flowers still blooming, the vegetables heavy with late-season fruit. What was the next milestone? A television show. This streaming platform wanted to create a reality series following a group of successful influencers. It would have been huge for my career, potentially worth millions in new opportunities. All I had to do was pass their background check and psychological evaluation. Something in her tone told me this was where the story took a darker turn. What did they find? Nothing. That was the problem. They found nothing. She turned away from the window and leaned against the counter. When they ran my background check, they discovered that most of my followers were fake. Purchased bots. My engagement metrics were artificially inflated. My success story was built on a foundation of lies. The words hung in the air between us. I felt a mixture of emotions. Sadness for Lila's disappointment, anger at whoever had manipulated her, and a grudging vindication of my earlier concerns about the sustainability of her chosen career. Did you know? I asked. Not at first. I hired a social media management company to help grow my following when I was starting out. They promised to get me to 100,000 followers within 6 months, and they delivered. I never asked how they did it, I just assumed they were really good at their job. But you found out later? She nodded, tears starting to fall. About a year ago, I started noticing inconsistencies. Posts that should have performed well getting very little genuine engagement. Comments that seemed repetitive or generic. But by then, I was making so much money that I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself that even if some of my followers weren't real, my influence on the real ones was still valuable. What happened when the show found out? They dropped me immediately, publicly. They released a statement saying they'd discovered irregularities in my social media presence and could no longer move forward with me as part of the cast. Within hours, it was all over the industry news sites. Other influencers started distancing themselves from me. Brands began canceling our partnerships. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I could see how quickly her world would have unraveled once the truth came out. How long ago was this? 3 months. At first, I thought I could weather it. Issue a statement, take responsibility, rebuild my following organically. But it was like watching a dam burst. Every day, more followers disappeared. More partnerships were canceled. My management company dropped me. My agent stopped returning my calls. What about your apartment? Your lifestyle? Gone. All of it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Turns out when your income is entirely dependent on your reputation, losing your reputation means losing everything else too. I couldn't afford the rent without the brand partnerships. I couldn't get new partnerships without credibility. I sold everything I could, but it wasn't enough. I sat back down at the table processing the magnitude of what she was telling me. Where have you been staying? Different places. Couches of people who were still willing to help. My car for a while. Then a shelter in downtown LA when I couldn't afford gas anymore. She looked embarrassed. I know how that sounds. I know what you must think of me. What I think, I said carefully, is that you're 25 years old, and you made some mistakes while trying to build a life for yourself. That doesn't make you a bad person. She looked at me with surprise, as if kindness was the last thing she'd expected. I said terrible things to you, Grandma. I called you irrelevant. I dismissed everything you'd accomplished, everything you'd learned. I was cruel and arrogant and wrong about everything. You were also 22, and convinced you had the world figured out. I remember being 22. I said plenty of things I regretted later. But you never came crawling back to family you'd insulted, begging for help. I considered this. No, I didn't. But then again, I was lucky enough to build my career during a time when the rules were more stable. When hard work and talent were usually enough, if you were persistent. Your generation faces challenges mine never had to navigate. She sat down across from me again, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. Are you saying you'll help me? I'm saying I need to understand what kind of help you're looking for. Are you asking for money, a place to stay, career advice, emotional support? I don't know, she admitted. I've been driving for 3 days, trying to work up the courage to knock on your door. I kept thinking about what you said about building things that last, about having backup plans. I realized I never learned how to do any of that. What do you want to do now? If you could start over, what would that look like? She was quiet for a long time, staring at the broken picture frame. I want to do something real, something that matters, but I don't know what that is anymore. I feel like I spent so many years creating this fake version of myself that I've lost track of who I actually am. I thought about the little girl who used to help me in the garden, who asked thoughtful questions about light and design and beauty. Maybe the question isn't who you are now, but who you want to become. How do I figure that out? The same way you figure out anything worth knowing, one step at a time, with patience and humility, and a willingness to make mistakes while you learn. She looked at me with an expression I remembered from her childhood, serious and hopeful, and slightly overwhelmed. Would you teach me how to build something that lasts? The question hit me unexpectedly hard. After 3 years of believing I'd lost her forever, here she was asking for exactly what I'd always hoped to give her. But I also knew that rebuilding, trust and teaching life skills to a young adult who'd been living independently for years would be complicated and challenging. I'll consider it, I said. But if we're going to do this, we need to establish some ground rules. This isn't a quick fix or a temporary solution. Building a meaningful life takes time and sustained effort. Are you prepared for that? I think so. I hope so. And you'll need to be honest with me. About your situation, your feelings, your goals. I can't help you if you're not willing to be truthful." She nodded. "I'll try. Also, I'm not going to just give you money and send you on your way. If you stay here, you'll contribute to the household. You'll help with chores, with cooking, with whatever needs doing. This isn't a hotel." "I understand." I looked at her for a long moment, trying to reconcile the defeated young woman sitting at my table with the confident influencer I'd seen in those photos. "There's one more thing. You hurt me, Lila. Deeply. I'm willing to help you rebuild your life, but I need to know that you understand the impact your words had on me." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I do understand. And I'm so sorry, Grandma. I was angry and scared, and I took it out on you, because you were the safest target. I knew you loved me enough to keep loving me, even after I said those horrible things. And you were right about that," I said softly. "But it still hurt." "I know. And I'll spend as long as it takes trying to make it up to you." I stood up and began collecting the pieces of the broken frame. "We'll start tomorrow. Tonight you'll get some rest. There's a guest room upstairs that hasn't been used in a while, but the bed is comfortable. We'll go through your options in the morning." "Thank you," she whispered. As I showed her to the guest room and found clean sheets and towels, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. I wanted to believe that Lila was ready to do the hard work of rebuilding her life. But I also knew that wanting to change and actually changing were two very different things. We'd both learned that lesson in our own ways. But as I fell asleep that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me, I realized that for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel alone. The house felt inhabited again, purposeful. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least we'd be facing them together. The hand-knitted scarf hung in my bedroom closet like a ghost from another life. I'd made it during Lila's first winter in Los Angeles, back when I still believed our estrangement might be temporary. The wool was soft lavender, her favorite color when she was small, and I'd incorporated a subtle cable pattern that reminded me of the Celtic knots David used to carve into small wooden boxes as gifts. I'd planned to send it for Christmas that first year, but pride and hurt feelings had intervened. Now it served as a reminder of all the care I'd invested in someone who had seemingly moved beyond needing anything I could offer. Lila had been in my house for 4 days, and we were both still learning how to navigate this new arrangement. She was trying hard, almost too hard, to be helpful and agreeable. She'd reorganized my spice cabinet, cleaned windows I hadn't even noticed were dirty, and insisted on cooking dinner every night, despite her limited culinary skills. I appreciated the effort, but I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she watched me constantly for signs of disapproval or impatience. This morning I found her sitting on the deck with her laptop, frowning at the screen with an intensity that reminded me of myself when I was struggling with a particularly challenging architectural problem. "What are you working on?" I asked, settling into the chair beside her with my coffee. She looked up, startled. "I'm trying to figure out my finances, how much debt I have, what I might be able to do to start paying it down. It's not encouraging." I glanced at her screen, which showed a spreadsheet with numbers that were indeed discouraging. "How bad? Is it?" "Bad! I owe about $40,000 in credit card debt, plus another $20,000 on a car loan for a car I had to sell, for much less than I owed. My bank account has about $300 left." "What about assets? Things you could sell?" She gestured vaguely at a small suitcase by the door. "Everything I own is in there. Clothes, mostly. And they're not worth much in the resale market. Designer pieces lose their value fast unless they're vintage or extremely rare. I did some quick mental calculations. $60,000 in debt for someone with no current income and limited job prospects. It was substantial, but not insurmountable. Have you thought about bankruptcy? My credit's already destroyed. I don't think it would help much at this point. She closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. I keep thinking about what you said about building things that last. I'm starting to understand that I never learned how to build anything real. I just learned how to create the appearance of success. Tell me about your day-to-day life in Los Angeles. What did a typical week look like? She was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. Exhausting, actually. People think being an influencer means taking pretty pictures and going to parties. But it's a constant hustle. I was creating content every day. Photos, videos, stories. I had to maintain multiple social media platforms, respond to comments and messages, research trends, reach out to brands for partnerships, negotiate contracts, track analytics. It sounds like you were working quite hard. I was. But it was all so ephemeral. Nothing I created lasted more than a few days in people's feeds before it was forgotten. I was constantly having to top myself, find new angles, stay relevant. And underneath it all, I always felt like a fraud because I wasn't actually selling anything of value. I was selling the idea of myself. I thought about my own career, the buildings that would outlast me by decades, the satisfaction of solving complex problems with concrete solutions. What made you choose that path in the first place? Honestly, it seemed easier than everything else. Traditional careers looked so demanding and uncertain. College was expensive and stressful, and even with a degree, there were no guarantees. But social media felt accessible. You didn't need special training or credentials, just creativity and persistence. And the success stories were so compelling. Young people making millions, traveling the world, being their own bosses. What did you think you'd be doing when you were my age? The question seemed to surprise her. I never thought that far ahead. The whole appeal was that it felt immediate and exciting. I was living in the moment, building my brand day by day. Long-term planning seemed old-fashioned, I guess. I understood the appeal of that mindset, but I also knew its limitations. One of the things I learned in architecture is that you can't build anything lasting without thinking about how it will age. Will the materials hold up? Will the design still be functional? As needs change? Will people still find it beautiful in 20 years? I never applied those questions to my own life. Most people don't at your age, but it's not too late to start. She looked out at the harbor, where a fishing boat was heading out for the day's work. How do I even begin? I have no real skills, no useful experience, no money. I'm 25, years old, and I feel like I'm starting from zero. You're not starting from zero. You have intelligence, creativity, and work ethic. You understand digital marketing and content creation, which are valuable skills even if you want to apply them differently. And you've learned some hard lessons about what doesn't work, which is actually quite valuable. So what do I do first? I'd been thinking about this question since she'd arrived. First, we need to address your immediate needs. Housing, food, basic stability. You can stay here while we figure out the next steps. Second, we need to explore your options for income. Even if it's not your ultimate career goal, you need work that can help you start addressing your debt. Third, we need to help you figure out what you actually want to do with your life. And you're willing to help me with all of that? I'm willing to help you learn how to help yourself. But Lila, this isn't going to be quick or easy. Rebuilding a life takes time, especially when you're starting from a difficult position. She nodded. I understand, and I'm grateful, more than I can express. But can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you helping me? After what I said to you, after how I treated you, why didn't you just send me away? I'd been expecting this question, but it was still difficult to answer. Because you're my granddaughter, and I love you, but also because I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age. Ambitious, determined, maybe a little too confident for your own good. I made plenty of mistakes when I was building my career. I just happened to make them in a more forgiving time. What kind of mistakes? I thought about David, about the balance I'd struggled to find between professional ambition and personal relationships. I prioritized work over relationships more often than I should have. I was so focused on proving myself professionally that I sometimes forgot to invest in the people who mattered most. Your grandfather paid a price for my ambition, and so did your mother? Is that why Mom and you aren't closer? Partly. Claire has never forgiven me for not being there when her father died. She thinks I chose my career over my family, and there's some truth to that accusation. I thought there would be time to balance everything out later, but sometimes later doesn't come. Lila was quiet for a long moment. I don't want to make the same mistakes. Then we'll try to help you learn from mine, instead of having to make your own. But first, we need to get you some work. Do you have any ideas about what you might want to try? I've been thinking about that. I know it sounds crazy, but I'd like to try something completely different from what I was doing before. Something that involves creating actual value for people. What does that look like to you? I don't know yet, but I want to learn how to build things, make things, fix things. I want to use my hands and my mind to solve real problems for real people. I felt a spark of recognition. That sounds like the beginning of a plan. Would you teach me? About building, I mean. I know I'm probably too old to become an architect, and I don't have the education for it anyway. But maybe there are other ways to create things that last. The request touched something deep in my chest. I'd be honored to teach you what I can. But we'll start small. Basic construction skills, design principles, project management. See what interests you most. I'd like that. Good. But first, let's address the immediate issue of income. Tomorrow we'll go into town and start looking for work. Nothing glamorous, probably, but something that can provide steady income while you figure out what comes next. That afternoon, I showed Lila my workshop in the basement, a space I'd set up when David and I first moved to the house, equipped with basic tools and a workbench where I'd built bookshelves and repaired furniture over the years. She ran her hands over the tools with something approaching reverence. I've never actually made anything with my hands, she admitted. I mean, nothing useful. We'll change that. But first, let's see what you remember about spatial reasoning and problem solving. I gave her a simple project, measuring and cutting pieces of wood to build a small box. She approached it methodically, asking questions about technique and double-checking her measurements. Her hands were awkward at first, unused to manual work, but she was patient with herself and careful with the tools. This is harder than it looks, she said, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. Most worthwhile things are. But notice how satisfying it is when you get a joint to fit properly, or when you solve a problem with the measurements. She nodded, focused intently on the piece she was sanding. It's different from anything I've done before. More grounding, I guess. That's a good word for it. There's something about working with your hands that connects you to the physical world in a way that digital work doesn't. By the end of the afternoon, she'd completed a simple but well-made box. She held it up to the light, examining the joints and the smoothness of the finish. "It's not perfect," she said. "Nothing is the first time. But it's yours, and it's solid, and it will last. That's what matters." That evening, as we prepared dinner together, I noticed her moving with more confidence around the kitchen. She was beginning to understand the rhythms of the house, the way routines could provide structure and comfort. "Grandma," she said as we sat down to eat, "I want you to know that I understand this is a gift you're giving me. This chance to start over. I don't take it for granted." "I know you don't. But Lila, this isn't just charity. I'm getting something out of this arrangement, too." "What do you mean?" I looked around the kitchen, noting how different it felt with both of us there. "This house has been very quiet for a long time. It's nice to have purpose again, to have someone to teach and plan with. You're giving me that." She smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her since she'd arrived. "So we're helping each other." "Exactly." "Now let's talk about tomorrow. We'll start early, hit the harbor first, to see if any of the businesses there are hiring, then work our way through town. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," she said. And for the first time since she'd shown up at my gate, I believed her. That night. I took the lavender scarf from my closet and laid it on the chair in the guest room. Some gifts were worth the wait, even when the timing hadn't been right the first time around. My journal lay open on the kitchen table, its pages filled with pressed flowers from 30 years of Maine summers. Lila had discovered it that morning, while I was getting dressed, and when I came downstairs, she was studying a page from 1995, where I'd pressed a wild rose from the day David and I had celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary. "You've been keeping this for so long," she said, her voice soft with something that might have been wonder. "It started as a way to track what bloomed when in the garden," I explained, settling beside her with my coffee. "But over the years, it became more of a record of important moments. Each flower represents a day that mattered." She turned the pages carefully, reading the brief notes I'd written beside each pressed specimen. "Here's one from my 10th birthday. Lila picked these daisies for a crown. She looked like a woodland fairy." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "You saved flowers from my birthday?" "I saved flowers from many of your birthdays. And first days of school, and Christmas mornings, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons when you helped me weed the garden." I turned to a page near the end of the journal. "This is from your last visit, the morning you left." The page held a single pressed pansy, deep purple with a yellow center. Beside it, I'd written only a date and the words, "Hoping she'll come. Home." Lila touched the flower gently. "You knew I'd come back?" "I hoped you would. Hope isn't the same as knowing, but sometimes it's enough to sustain you through the waiting." We'd been working together for 2 weeks now, and the changes were subtle but noticeable. Lila had found part-time work at Ruby's nephew's boat repair shop, basic cleaning and organizing, but honest work that paid enough to cover her basic expenses and begin addressing her debt. More importantly, she seemed to be finding some peace in the physical nature of the work, the way her body felt tired at the end of the day, instead of just her mind. In the evenings, I'd been teaching her basic construction skills in my workshop. She was a quick learner, patient with herself when things didn't go perfectly the first time. Last week, she'd built a simple side table that now sat in her room, holding her few personal belongings with quiet dignity. "Can I ask you about Mom?" she said, still studying the journal. "What would you like to know?" "Why things went wrong between you two. I mean, I know the basics. That she blames you for Grandpa's death, that you were both too stubborn to bridge the gap. But there must be more to it than that." I closed the journal and leaned back in my chair. This was a conversation I'd been expecting but dreading. "Your mother and I are more alike than either of us wants to admit. We're both strong-willed, both convinced we know the right way to handle difficult situations. When your grandfather died, we handled our grief differently, and neither of us was willing to compromise." "What do you mean?" "Claire wanted to blame someone for her father's death. It was sudden and unfair, and she needed to make sense of it. I was an obvious target because I wasn't there when it happened, because I'd chosen work over being home. That week, she needed me to take responsibility for that choice. And you wouldn't? I couldn't. Not in the way she wanted me to. Yes, I made choices that put my career ahead of my family sometimes. But your grandfather's heart attack wasn't caused by my work schedule. It was caused by genetics and stress and 40 years of eating too much red meat and not exercising enough." Claire wanted simple answers to a complicated loss. Lila nodded slowly. "What did you want from her? Understanding, forgiveness, recognition that I was grieving too, and that my grief was different from hers but equally valid." I paused, remembering those difficult months after David's funeral. I wanted her to acknowledge that David had supported my career, that he'd been proud of my work, that our marriage had been a partnership even if it wasn't always perfectly balanced. But she couldn't do that. She was 26 and had just lost her father. I was 55 and had just lost my husband. We were both in pain. And pain makes people say things they can't take back. "What kinds of things?" I hesitated. Some wounds were still tender, even after all these years. She told me that I was selfish and cold, that I'd never learned how to put family first, that her father would still be alive if I'd been a better wife. I told her that she was ungrateful and naive, that she didn't understand the sacrifices I'd made to build a career that could support all of us. Ouch! Yes, ouch. We were both right about some things and wrong about others, but neither of us was willing to admit that at the time. Lila turned back to the journal, flipping through pages of pressed flowers and brief memories. "Do you think she'll ever forgive you?" "I don't know. I've tried reaching out over the years, but she's built a life in London that doesn't seem to have room for me in it. When she calls on holidays, our conversations are polite but distant. She asks about my health and tells me about her work, but we don't talk about anything that matters. That's so sad. It is. But it's also a choice we've both made. Healing a relationship requires both people to be willing to do the work, and I don't think Claire is ready for that yet. What about you? Are you ready?" I considered the question. I'm ready to try if she is, but I can't force it, and I can't keep hoping for something that may never happen. At some point, you have to accept the relationships you have rather than mourning the ones you wish you had. Is that what you did with me? Accepted that I was gone? "No," I said firmly. "With you, I kept hoping, maybe because you were younger. Maybe because I could remember you as a child, who loved me unconditionally, or maybe because I recognized something of myself in your mistakes." "What do you mean?" "Your determination to succeed on your own terms, your willingness to take risks, your refusal to accept other people's limitations. Those are all qualities I had at your age, and they served me well in many ways. But they also made me stubborn, and sometimes blind to other people's needs. So you saw potential in me that you didn't see in Mom? I saw different things. Your mother has always been more cautious, more practical. She makes careful choices and sticks with them. Those are valuable qualities, too. But they're not qualities that lead to dramatic mistakes or spectacular recoveries. Lila laughed. So, you're saying I'm more dramatic? I'm saying you're more willing to risk failure in pursuit of something meaningful. That's a gift, but it's also a responsibility. It means you have to be thoughtful about how you use that willingness to take risks. Is that why you're teaching me to build things? To help me channel that energy into something constructive? Partly. But mostly I'm teaching you because you asked me to, and because I've missed having someone to share my knowledge with. I reached across the table and touched her hand. You've given me a purpose I'd lost, Lila. For the first time in years, I feel like my experience has value to someone other than myself. It does have value. More than I understood when I was younger. And you have value too. More than you understood. When you were caught up in that artificial world in Los Angeles. She closed the journal and looked out the window toward the harbor. I've been thinking about what I want to do next. Long term, I mean. Tell me. I want to learn restoration work. Old buildings, historic preservation. I want to take things that are broken or neglected and help them become beautiful and functional again. The idea surprised me with its rightness. That's a wonderful goal. It combines creativity with practical skills, and there's always demand for good restoration work, especially in a place like Maine with so much historic architecture. Would you help me figure out how to get the training I'd need? Absolutely. There are apprenticeship programs, community college courses, professional certifications. It won't be quick or easy, but it's entirely achievable. And in the meantime, you keep working at the boat shop, keep learning in my workshop, keep paying down your debt one day at a time. Building a meaningful life is like building a house. You start with a solid foundation and add to it gradually. That afternoon, I showed Lila how to press flowers properly, demonstrating the technique I'd been using for decades. We walked through the garden together, selecting specimens that would hold their color and form well. She chose a late-blooming rose, several varieties of wildflowers, and a sprig of rosemary from the herb garden. What will you write beside them? I asked as we arranged the flowers in my old flower press. Today I learned that hope is a form of planning, she said without hesitation. That's beautiful and true. I learned it from you. As we worked together in the garden that evening, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables and preparing the beds for fall planting, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with the work itself. This was what I'd been missing without realizing it. The sense of continuity, of knowledge being passed down, of love being expressed through shared labor. Grandma, Lila said as we carried baskets of tomatoes and squash toward the house. I need to tell you something. What's that? I called Mom yesterday. I told her where I was, what happened in LA, what I'm trying to do now. My heart skipped. How did that go? Better than expected. She was surprised, but not angry. She said she'd been worried about me for a while, that some of my social media posts had seemed forced, I guess. Like I wasn't really happy. What else did she say? She asked about you, how you were treating me, whether I felt safe here. Lila paused at the kitchen door. I told her you were taking better care of me than I deserved, and that I was finally learning things I should have learned years ago. And how did she respond to that? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said that maybe it was time for all of us to start learning from our mistakes instead of just repeating them. Hope, that dangerous, persistent emotion, stirred in my chest. Did she say anything else? She said she might call you soon, to check in, see how things are going. She didn't make any promises, but it sounded like she was thinking about it. I set down my basket and hugged Lila impulsively. Thank you for calling her, for telling her the truth about what's happening here. Thank you for giving me something worth telling her about. That night, I added a new entry to my journal. Not a pressed flower this time, but a few lines about hope and second chances and the unexpected ways families find their way back to each other. Some stories take decades to unfold, but that doesn't make them any less worthwhile when they finally reach their resolution. The legal documents arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who seemed surprised to find our quiet, coastal town. I signed for the thick envelope with my usual efficiency, assuming it was something routine, property tax information or insurance paperwork. But when I opened it at my kitchen table while Lila was at work, the contents made my coffee go cold, and my hands start trembling. Lila's father was dead. Not just dead. He'd been dead for 2 years, and according to the probate attorney's letter, he'd left her everything. A house in Portland, Maine, a workshop filled with woodworking equipment, and a bank account containing nearly $200,000. I read the documents 3 times before their meaning fully penetrated. James Morrison, a name I'd heard exactly once when Claire had mentioned the charming but unreliable man who had fathered her daughter and then disappeared. He'd been living less than 3 hours away from us all these years, working as a master carpenter and furniture maker, building what appeared to have been a successful small business. The letter from his attorney explained that James had been trying to locate Lila for the past 5 years, ever since he'd gotten clean from the addiction issues that had driven him away from Claire and their infant daughter. He'd hired private investigators, searched social media, even tried reaching out to Claire, but she'd refused to give him any information about Lila's whereabouts. When he died suddenly of a heart attack at 53, his will directed that his estate should continue the search and transfer everything to Lila once she was found. The social media scandal that had destroyed Lila's influencer career had also made her easier to find. The attorney had traced her from the Los Angeles news coverage back to her family connections in Maine, and from there to my address. I sat with the papers spread across my table trying to process the implications. Lila thought she had nothing. No family connections, no financial resources, no options, except whatever she could build from scratch. This inheritance would change everything. It would solve her debt problems instantly and give her the financial freedom to pursue any career path she wanted, including the restoration work she'd been dreaming about. But it would also mean she no longer needed the life we'd been building together here in Seabrook Harbor. I heard her car in the driveway and quickly gathered the documents into their envelope. This wasn't my news to process first. It was hers. But my hands were still shaking as I put the kettle on for tea. "How was work?" I asked when she came through the door, dirty and tired but smiling. "Good, actually. Jack is teaching me how to rebuild outboard motors. It's fascinating how all the pieces fit together, how you can take something that's completely broken and make it run like new again." She paused, studying my face. "Is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost, exactly, but we need to talk. Sit down." She sat, suddenly alert. "What's wrong?" I handed her the envelope. "This came for you today. I think you should read it before we discuss it." She opened the envelope and began reading, her expression moving from confusion to shock, to something I couldn't quite identify. The silence stretched between us as she worked through the documents, checking and rechecking the attorney's letter. "My father is dead," she said finally. "I'm sorry. I never even knew his last name. Mom always just called him James, and only when I pressed her for information." She looked up at me with wide eyes. "He left me a house, and money, and—" She shuffled through the papers. "A woodworking shop." "It appears so." "How is this possible? How did he find me?" I explained what I'd pieced together from the attorney's letter. The years of searching, the recent breakthrough via the social media coverage, the inheritance that had been waiting for her discovery. "He was looking for me," she said, wonder in her voice. "For 5 years he was trying to find me. It seems that way. And Mom knew. She knew he was clean, knew he wanted to be part of my life, and she never told me." I could hear the anger building in her voice, but also the hurt. Your mother was protecting you. At least that's what she thought she was doing. Protecting me from what? From having a father? From knowing that someone cared enough to spend years trying to find me? From disappointment, probably. From getting your hopes up about someone who had already let you down once. But that should have been my choice to make. She was right, of course, but I also understood Claire's perspective. The desire to shield your child from potential pain, even when that protection came at a cost. "What does this mean?" Lila asked, looking at the documents again. "What am I supposed to do with all this?" "That's entirely up to you. You could sell the house and use the money to start fresh anywhere you want. You could move to Portland and take over his workshop. You could donate everything to charity and continue building the life you've started here. There's no right answer." "Need to see it," she said suddenly. "The house, the workshop. I need to understand who he was, what he built." "Of course. We can drive to Portland this weekend if you'd like." "Would you come with me? If you want me to?" "I do. I don't think I can process this alone." That weekend we made the drive to Portland in my old Subaru, both of us quiet with anticipation. The address led us to a modest neighborhood of craftsman-style houses, tree-lined streets where people clearly took pride in their small gardens and well-maintained properties. James's house was a 1920s bungalow that had been lovingly restored, with original hardwood floors, built-in bookcases, and windows that filled the rooms with natural light. But it was the workshop behind the house that took our breath away. "Oh my God," Lila whispered as we stood in the doorway. The space was immaculate and well organized, with hand tools arranged on pegboards, lumber sorted by type and size, and several pieces of furniture in various stages of completion. A beautiful dining table sat in the center of the room, its cherry wood surface gleaming with a finish that spoke of patient, skilled work. "He was really talented," I said, running my hand along the smooth edge of the table. Lila picked up a piece of paper from the workbench, a note written in careful handwriting. "For Lila," she read aloud. "If you ever find this place, I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. But I never stopped thinking about you. I hope someday you'll understand that love isn't always enough, but it's always worth trying for. Your father, James." She sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "He made this for me. This table, this whole workshop. He was hoping I'd find it someday." I sat beside her, my own eyes burning. "He sounds like someone who understood both failure and redemption." "I could learn so much here," she said, looking around the workshop. This is exactly the kind of space I've been dreaming about. Somewhere to learn furniture making, restoration work, all the skills I want to develop. So you're thinking about moving here? I don't know. Maybe. It would solve a lot of problems. The debt, the career training, having a real place to live instead of camping out in your guest room. She paused. But it would also mean leaving you, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Lila, this is an incredible opportunity. You shouldn't make decisions based on what you think I need from you. But what we've built together these past few weeks, it matters to me. You matter to me. I don't want to lose that again. I thought about my conversation with Alan the previous evening, when I'd told him about the inheritance. You know, he'd said, maybe the question isn't whether she stays or goes, but whether you're willing to be part of her life regardless of geography. We don't have to lose anything, I said now. Portland is 3 hours away, not 3,000 miles, and there's nothing stopping you from building a life that includes both this workshop and our relationship. What do you mean? I mean, you could work here during the week and come home to Seabrook Harbor on weekends. Or I could come visit you here sometimes. Or we could find some other arrangement that works for both of us. She looked at me with surprise. You'd do that? You'd change your routine, your comfortable life to maintain a relationship with me? Lila, you've reminded me that comfortable isn't the same as fulfilling. These past few weeks with you have been the most purposeful I've felt. In years, I'm not ready to give that up just because it might require some flexibility. But what about your house, your garden, your life in Seabrook Harbor? My house will still be there. My garden will survive my occasional absences. And my life in Seabrook Harbor is richer when it includes you, whether that's full-time or part-time. We spent the rest of the day exploring the house and reading through James's papers. He'd kept a journal, it turned out, filled with entries about his recovery, his woodworking projects, and his hopes of someday reconnecting with his daughter. The last entry, written just a week before his death, talked about a dining table he was building for the granddaughter I hope to meet someday. He knew about your kids, I realized. He'd been following your life somehow. Through social media, probably. God, what must he have thought of all that superficial nonsense I was posting? I think he probably thought the same thing I thought. That his daughter was talented and beautiful and trying to find her way in a complicated world. As we prepared to leave Portland that evening, Lila stood in the workshop one more time, touching the tools and examining the unfinished projects. I want to try it, she said. Living here, learning from what he built, finishing the projects he started. But I want to do it gradually. Maybe spend a few days a week here at first. That sounds like a wise approach. And I want you to help me. Not just with the practical stuff, but with understanding him, figuring out how to honor what he was trying to do here. I'd be honored to help. There's something else, she said, pulling an envelope from James's desk. I want to call Mom. I want to ask her about him. Not to blame her for the choices she made, but to understand them and to tell her about what we've found here. How do you think she'll react? I don't know, but I think it's time for all of us to start having harder conversations about Dad, about you, about the ways we've all hurt each other, and the ways we might start healing. That night, as we drove back to Seabrook Harbor under a sky full of stars, I felt something shift in my understanding of what family could be. It didn't have to be perfect or simple or geographically convenient. It just had to be intentional. People, choosing to stay connected despite distance and difficulty, and the inevitable complications of human relationships. Grandma. Lila said as we pulled into my driveway. "Thank you for coming with me today, and for helping me see that I don't have to choose between honoring my father's memory and maintaining our relationship. Thank you for showing me that love can be expressed in many different ways, through building something together, through giving someone space to grow, through being flexible enough to let relationships evolve. I love you," she said simply. "I love you too, sweetheart, and I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming." As I fell asleep that night, I thought about James's note to his daughter, and his understanding that love isn't always enough, but it's always worth trying for. He'd been right about that. Sometimes love requires patience, sometimes it requires distance, and sometimes it requires the wisdom to know the difference. The old compass sat on my desk like a talisman, its brass surface worn smooth by decades of handling. David had given it to me for our 10th anniversary, back when we still believed we had endless time to explore all the places we dreamed of visiting together. For when you need to find your way home. He'd inscribed on the back, though at the time I'd thought home was simply wherever we happened to be together. Now, 37 years later, I was beginning to understand what he'd really meant. Lila had been splitting her time between Portland and Seabrook Harbor for 6 weeks, and I could see the change in her with each visit. She was gaining confidence in the workshop, learning to read wood grain and understand the patient rhythm of handcraft. More importantly, she was beginning to build relationships with other craftspeople in Portland, a community of furniture makers and restoration specialists who valued skill and dedication over social media metrics. But the real transformation had come from an unexpected source: her mother. Claire had called 3 weeks ago, ostensibly to check on Lila's progress, but really, I suspected to satisfy her own curiosity about what was happening between her daughter and me. The conversation had started carefully, both of us aware that we were navigating old wounds, but it had gradually warmed into something approaching genuine communication. "I owe you an apology," Claire had said near the end of that first call, "for keeping James's attempts to contact Lila from you both. I thought I was protecting her, but I was really protecting myself from having to deal with complicated emotions. We all make choices based on the information and emotional capacity we have at the time," I'd replied. "The question is whether we're willing to learn from those choices and make different ones going forward. Is that your way of saying, you forgive me? It's my way of saying I understand you, and I'm ready to move forward if you are." Since then, we'd been talking weekly, tentative conversations that grew a little easier each time. Claire had even mentioned the possibility of visiting during her next trip to the United States, though we were both being careful not to put too much pressure on that idea. This morning, Lila had called with news that would change everything. "Again! I got the apprenticeship!" she said, her voice bright with excitement. "The furniture restoration program at the Maine College of Art. It's a 2-year program that combines traditional techniques with business training. I start in January." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Congratulations. There's more. They want me to do my capstone project on James's workshop, documenting his techniques, finishing some of his unfinished pieces, creating a portfolio that honors traditional Maine furniture making. It would be like getting to know him through his work." "That sounds perfect for you." "It is. But here's the thing. I want to ask Mom to come for the project presentation. I want her to see what he built, understand who he became. I think she needs that closure as much as I need to understand my heritage." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Claire hadn't been back to Maine in 8 years, hadn't seen me in person since David's funeral. But maybe that distance was exactly what made this possible. Enough time had passed for the sharp edges of our old arguments to wear smooth. How do you think she'll respond? I asked. I don't know. But I think she might be ready to try. She's been asking a lot of questions about you lately. Not accusatory ones, but genuinely curious ones. About your health, your daily routine. What makes you happy these days? And what do you tell her? The truth. That you're stronger and more vibrant than she probably remembers. That you've taught me more about resilience in the past 3 months than I learned in my entire 20s. That you're not the same person she argued with 15 years ago. None of us are the same people we were 15 years ago. That's the point of living. You're supposed to grow and change. Would you be okay with it, if she came to visit? I looked around my kitchen, imagining Claire sitting at this table trying to picture the conversations we might have. I'd be more than okay with it. I'd be grateful for the chance. Even if it's awkward, even if we all say the wrong things sometimes, especially then. Awkward conversations are how families figure out how to love each other across differences. That afternoon, Ruby and I walked down to the harbor to watch the fishing boats come in. A routine we'd maintained for years, but that felt different now, with so much change swirling around us. You seem nervous, Ruby observed as we settled onto our favorite bench overlooking the water. Excited nervous, not anxious nervous. But yes, there's a lot happening. Tell me about this potential visit from Claire. I don't know what to expect. We've been talking more, but talking on the phone is different from being in the same room, and there's so much history to navigate. What's the worst thing that could happen? I considered this. We could fall back into old patterns. She could blame me for things I can't change. I could get defensive. We could hurt each other all over again. And the best thing, we could finally understand each other. Not agree about everything, but understand why we each made the choices we made. Maybe even forgive each other. And most likely, something in between. Probably messy and imperfect, but real, she nodded. That's what most family relationships are. Messy and imperfect, but real. The alternative is clean and simple and completely artificial. Is that your way of telling me to stop overthinking this? It's my way of telling you that you've already done the hard work. You've rebuilt your relationship with Lila. You've proven you can apologize and change and be flexible. Claire has seen that evidence. Now you just have to trust that it's enough. That evening, I called Alan to tell him about the potential visit and about my mixed feelings surrounding it. What are you most afraid of? He asked. That I'll discover I haven't changed as much as I think I have. That under pressure, I'll revert to the defensive, stubborn person I was when Claire and I had our worst fights. And what if you do? Then I'll have hurt her again, and probably lost any chance of repairing our relationship. Ellie, you're assuming that the responsibility for making this work rests entirely on you. But Claire is an adult who's had 15 years to grow and change too. Maybe she's just as nervous about reverting to old patterns. Maybe she's just as invested in making this work. Or maybe she's coming to satisfy her curiosity and doesn't really want a relationship with me at all. Maybe. But you won't know unless you try. And if it doesn't work out, at least you'll know you gave it your best effort. When did you become so wise about family relationships? When I spent 10 years estranged from my own son, I finally learned that pride is an expensive luxury when it costs you the people you love. The next morning, Lila called. Claire agreed to visit, not just for the presentation, but for a long weekend. She's nervous, Lila said, but she's tired of carrying around old anger. When's she coming? Thanksgiving. She figured if we're going to try a family gathering, we might as well commit. Here. At my house? If that's okay with you. It's not too much to ask. This house hasn't had a real family dinner in years. I want you to know, I added, that whatever happens, I'm grateful. You reminded me families can heal, that it's never too late. You reminded me I'm worth healing for, she said. And that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. That night I sat with David's compass in my hands. I thought about navigation, about true north, and the difference between the direction you think you're heading and the place you actually need to go. For years I believed peace meant accepting distance from people who'd hurt me. But maybe peace meant being brave enough to risk hurt again in service of connection. In 6 weeks, my table would hold 3 generations of Bainbridge women for the first time in 15 years. We would eat, talk, and probably say some wrong things alongside the right ones. But for the first time in years, I was excited. Uncertainty meant possibility, and possibility was hope made actionable. I closed the compass and returned it to my desk, beside the flower journal and architectural drawings, artifacts of a life lived with intention. Tomorrow I'd plan a Thanksgiving menu for 3 very different women with 3 very different ideas about family. That morning the brass house key felt heavy in my palm as I watched Claire's rental car arrive. She was early, just like when she was a child. Always prepared. Always ahead. Some things never changed. She's here. I called upstairs. How does she look? Lila asked. Like herself, but older. Like all of us. Claire paused at the garden gate, the same place Lila had stood 3 months ago. Then she squared her shoulders and walked up the path, her heels clicking against the flagstones David and I had laid 30 years ago. I opened the door, my heart pounding. We stood for a moment, just looking at each other. This woman who had once been my baby. Hello, Mom, she said, her voice unchanged. Hello, sweetheart. We embraced, awkwardly at first, but warmly. She smelled like expensive perfume and airplane coffee, but under that was something deeply comforting. The scent of my daughter, home again. You look good, she said. Younger than I expected. Having Lila here has been good for me. Purpose makes a difference. So I'm learning. Lila came down the stairs. I watched Claire's face soften as she saw her daughter. My God, you're beautiful. You look so much like your father. I have his hands, Lila said. Good for making things. Show me. We spent the morning in the workshop. Lila demonstrated her new skills. Claire asked thoughtful questions about joinery, wood selection, and patience. This is so different from LA, Claire said, as Lila showed her a jewelry box built from salvaged cherry wood. Everything is different now, Lila replied. Better different, more real. I owe you an apology, Claire said suddenly. About your father, about keeping his attempts to contact you from both of you. I was wrong. You were protecting me, Lila said. I was protecting myself, Claire said. James wasn't the man I needed him to be. But that didn't give me the right to decide he could never become that man. I listened with pride and sorrow. Pride for their courage, sorrow for what they'd lost. What were you afraid would happen? Lila asked. Claire ran her fingers over a table James had built. I was afraid he'd disappoint you the way he disappointed me. And I was afraid you'd love him, then lose him. And worse, I was afraid you'd see how inadequate I'd been as a single parent. You weren't inadequate, Lila said. You did your best. Was I? Because seeing what you've done here with Mom, I wonder if I should have encouraged you to spend more time with her. I felt the old urge to deflect, to retreat. But then I saw hope on Lila's face. "Claire," I said. "We all made choices we thought were right. You were protecting her. I was respecting your autonomy. Lila was finding her way. None of those instincts were wrong. But think of all the time we lost," Claire whispered. "And think of all the time we have now," Lila replied. That afternoon we made Thanksgiving dinner together. Claire was efficient, polished. Lila brought energy and enthusiasm. As we worked, conversation flowed. Claire told us about London, her work, her British husband. Lila shared stories of her workshop, her projects, her future plans. I talked about David, about aging, about Alan. For the first time in decades, I felt seen. Not through resentment, but as myself. "I need to say something," Claire said at dinner. The table was beautiful. China, flowers, candlelight. "I blamed you for Dad's death," she said. "But I was angry at him too, for leaving us, for dying. It was easier to blame you than accept that life is unfair. I blamed myself too," I said. "But you couldn't have stopped it," Lila said. "Just like Mom couldn't have known that keeping him away would hurt me." "When did you become so wise?" Claire asked. "When I learned forgiveness isn't excusing mistakes. It's understanding that we're all doing our best with the tools we have." "I learned that from Grandma," she added. Later, as Claire prepared to leave, she lingered at the door. "I'd like to come back. Not just for visits, maybe holidays, birthdays, random weekends. I'd like that. And Lila, I want to be more involved, not to manage your life, but to support it." "I want that too, Mom." Claire reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. "This is Dad's wedding ring. I've carried it for 15 years. I think he'd want you to have it back." I held the simple gold band, still warm from her touch. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for showing me it's never too late to come home." After Claire left, Lila and I sat on the porch with tea. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Full," she said. "Not just from dinner, from everything. It's like the pieces of my life finally make sense." "What do you mean?" "I understand now why Mom made the choices she did, why you did, why I did. We were all protecting, but from fear instead of love. And now? Now I think we're ready to love from strength, not because we're perfect, but because we're honest." I slipped David's ring on my right hand. "I'm proud of you, Lila." "I'm proud of us," she said. That night, I lay in bed holding the brass house key David and I had chosen when we moved here. Tomorrow, I'd make copies for Claire and Lila, not because they needed them, but because they needed to know they'd always be welcome, that this place would always be a home. Family wasn't about perfection. It was about leaving the door open, about loving through change, about building home new each day. The key felt warm in my hand as I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of open doors, people coming home, and second chances. The new seedlings lined my windowsill like promises of spring, their green shoots reaching toward the January light. I'd started them from seeds Lila had brought, heirlooms from her father's garden in Portland. It had been 2 months since Thanksgiving. Claire had visited twice. Each time things felt easier. We were remembering how to be a family again. Lila was thriving. She'd completed a restoration of a 19th century table, damaged but full of potential. "It's like getting to know someone," she'd said. You have to understand what they were meant to be before you can help them become that again. That morning, she arrived for her weekly visit, arms full of wrapped packages. "What's all that?" "Surprises," she said, grinning. "And lunch, because I know you'll forget to eat." She moved through the house naturally now, like she belonged. "Before we start with the seeds," she said, "I have something for you." She unwrapped. A cherry wood box, its dovetail joints precise, the brass hardware elegant. "You made this," I said. "It's for your journal and pressed flowers." I thought maybe it was time to stop just saving memories and start celebrating them. Inside, compartments held tools, blank pages, and room to grow. The wood smelled of her father's workshop, of sawdust, linseed oil, and love made visible. "Lila, this is beautiful. You're becoming quite skilled." "I had good teachers," she said. "James's techniques are documented in his journals, and you've taught me to think about function as well as form. This box is designed to last for generations, to hold whatever memories you want to preserve." I thought about the progression from her first awkward attempts at measuring and cutting wood to this sophisticated piece of furniture. Growth, I realized, was often invisible until you looked back far enough to see the distance traveled. "There's something else," she said, unwrapping a smaller package. "I had this made for you." Inside was a brass nameplate, the kind that might grace an architect's desk or a professor's office. It read simply, "Eleanor Bainbridge, Master Teacher." "I don't understand," I said. "I've been thinking about what you've given me these past months. Not just practical skills, but ways of thinking about problems, about relationships, about building a life that has meaning. You've been my teacher in the truest sense, someone who helped me discover abilities I didn't know I had. Teaching goes both ways," I said. "You've taught me things, too." "Like what? Like how to forgive myself for past mistakes. Like how to stay open to unexpected opportunities. Like how to love someone enough to let them change without trying to control the direction of that change." We spent the morning working with the seedlings, our hands moving in complementary rhythms as I demonstrated techniques, and she practiced them. There was something meditative about the work, the careful measurement of soil, the precise placement of seeds, the gentle watering that encouraged growth without overwhelming tender roots. "Tell me about your plans for the spring," I said, as we worked. "I'll be finishing the apprenticeship program in May, and then I want to start my own restoration business. Small projects at first. Furniture repair, basic renovation work. But eventually, I'd like to specialize in historic preservation, working on old buildings that need careful attention to maintain their character." That sounds like a perfect fit for your interests and skills. I hope so. I've been thinking about what James wrote in his journal about building things that outlast the builder. I want to do work that matters, that contributes something lasting to the world. And personally, are you thinking about staying in Portland, or might you consider moving back to Seabrook Harbor? She paused in her work, considering the question. I think Portland is right for now. The business opportunities are better there, and I'm building relationships in the restoration community. But I love coming back here. Love being part of your daily life. Maybe eventually I'll find a way to do both. You know you're always welcome here. This will always be home for you, regardless of where you live. I know. And that knowledge makes it easier to take risks, knowing I have a safe harbor to return to. That afternoon, Alan joined us for lunch, bringing wine and stories from his recent trip to visit his own son in California. I watched Lila interact with him, noted how easily she'd accepted his presence in my life, How naturally she included him in our family dynamic. "Have you thought about traveling?" Alan asked Lila as we lingered over dessert. "Now that you're getting established in your career, you might consider studying restoration techniques in other countries. Europe has some incredible programs. I've thought about it," she said. "But right now, I'm focused on mastering the basics and building my business. Maybe in a few years when I have more experience and financial stability." "Wise approach," he said. "But don't wait too long. The world has a lot to teach, and it's good to learn from different traditions." "What about you, Grandma?" Lila asked. "Have you thought about traveling? You and Alan could explore some of those places you and Grandpa always talked about visiting." The question surprised me. Travel had seemed like something for younger people, something that required energy and flexibility. I wasn't sure I still possessed, but looking at Alan's hopeful expression, I found myself reconsidering old assumptions about what was possible at my age. "Maybe we should look into that," I said. "Nothing too ambitious at first, but perhaps a trip to Scotland to see some of the castle restorations there." "I'd love that," Alan said, reaching for my hand. As the day wound down and Lila prepared to return to Portland, she pulled out one final wrapped package. "This isn't a gift exactly," she said. "It's more like a proposal." Inside was a folder containing architectural drawings, plans for a small workshop addition to my house, designed to accommodate both my needs and visiting craftspeople. "I've been thinking about ways to expand the teaching you've been doing with me," she explained. "What if we created a space where you could offer workshops on design principles, project planning, problem-solving approaches? Not just for woodworkers, but for anyone interested in learning how to build things that last." I studied the drawings, noting how thoughtfully she'd considered the integration with my existing house, the natural light, the practical workflow. "This is quite ambitious." "I know. And it would be a big project, probably take most of the summer to complete, but I think it could be wonderful. A way to share your knowledge with more people to create something meaningful together. Would you help with the construction?" "I'd love to. It would be good practice for me, and a chance for us to collaborate on something substantial." I imagined the space she'd drawn, workshop tables where people could learn to use their hands, to solve problems, walls lined with tools and reference materials, windows that captured the changing light throughout the day. It would be a place where knowledge could be passed down, where the satisfaction of making something useful could be shared across generations. "Yes," I said. "Let's do it." Her face lit up with the same joy I remembered from her childhood, when simple plans could generate enormous excitement. "Really? Really. We'll start planning in earnest this spring, begin construction in early summer. By fall, we should have a beautiful space for sharing what we know." As I walked her to her car, that evening she turned back to look at the house, her expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "Just how different everything is from a year ago. How much has changed, how much I've learned about myself and about family, and about what I want my life to look like." "And how do you feel about those changes?" "Grateful," she said without hesitation. "Grateful for the failure that brought me back here. Grateful for your willingness to take me in. Grateful for the chance to rebuild relationships I thought were lost forever." "I'm grateful too," I said, "for your courage in coming back, for your willingness to do the hard work of changing, for reminding me that it's never too late to start something new." We hugged goodbye, and I watched her drive away with the mixture of satisfaction and anticipation that had become familiar. She would be back next weekend, and the weekend after that, creating a rhythm of connection that honored both her independence and our relationship. As I turned back toward the house, I noticed that the seedlings in the kitchen window were already showing signs of growth, tiny secondary leaves emerging from stems that had been bare just days before. It was a reminder that growth often happened in ways too subtle to notice day by day. But when you looked carefully, when you paid attention to the small changes, you could see life persistently pushing toward light and possibility. Inside, I arranged the brass nameplate on my desk next to David's compass and the pressed flower journal, Master Teacher. It was a title I'd never applied to myself, but one that felt increasingly accurate. Not because I had all the answers, but because I'd learned to ask better questions, to approach problems with patience and creativity, to understand that the most important lessons often emerge from the process of working through challenges together. The new wooden box sat beside the journal, ready to hold whatever memories and discoveries the coming seasons might bring. Through the window, I could see the harbor settling into evening quiet, the water reflecting the last light of winter afternoon. Tomorrow I would start planning the workshop edition, sketching possibilities and considering materials. Next month, Claire would visit again, and Alan and I would begin researching our potential trip to Scotland. But tonight I would simply sit with the satisfaction of a day well spent, grateful for the abundance that had emerged from what had once seemed like irreparable loss. The seedlings would continue their patient growth in the darkness, and I would dream of all the beautiful things that could be built with patience, skill, and love. Not just furniture and buildings, but relationships and lives and legacies that would outlast any individual lifetime. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.